extending our analysis and attention to the critical social and critical issues involved in public education. And though not always obvious, we believe, we at least in Peace Action believe, that a subset of public issues that we encounter locally reflect failure of the federal budget to properly invest in our young people's education and development. And of course, there may be failures in the state funding and local funding also. So our session chair is Rep. Carol Doherty of the 3rd Bristol District. Carol was previously a member of the Taunton School Committee and on the education faculty of Northeastern University. And before that, she was a president of the Massachusetts Association. Few people are more qualified to lead this forum. Carol, take it away.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Jonathan. My entire career focus has been on education, public education, particularly for many, many, many years. And so I'm very pleased to be able to facilitate this panel of wonderful educators themselves. As we all know, there is a great responsibility as a society to assure that our children have an adequate education, more than an adequate education, a quality expectation with education with very high expectations. Not only in the olden days, it was only property tax that funded education. The state has made and continues to make a great contribution to support the cost of education at the local level. But it would be much better if we had those resources from the federal government that our kids really deserve. The Books Not Bombs campaign was born out of the Jobs with Peace campaign many years ago. And so I recognize the slide that Cole is about to present that indicates Books Not Bombs in some way. And I see my friend Kathy Greeley, who was very much a part of the Books Not Bombs campaign when the Jobs with Peace campaign just began. She came to the MTA, asked us to adopt a resolution in that regard, and we certainly did, and we've been going forward ever since. So here is Cole. He has 3 slides to share and some commentary.
I thought you were giving the commentary, but I will attempt to give it, Carol. This is the cover of a booklet, Books Not Bombs, that was created 35 years ago. Carol and Jonathan were there. They know about this booklet.
Kathy Greeley too was there.
Okay. And so, but this was an effort to push on the whole issue of our society spends so much on military, so much on war, and lacks sufficient resources to provide a quality education. So there was like a detailed analysis with facts and figures and everything. So we would love to resurrect this booklet, rewrite it for today's situation with new research and new and updated information and analysis. We need volunteers to form a campaign to work on that. So I'm throwing that invitation out. This is the federal budget in the current fiscal year. The what's termed militarism here includes 62%, which includes the base Department of Defense budget, the supplemental appropriations for Ukraine, already over $100 billion, the funding for nuclear weapons, which is separate, the funding for veterans affairs, which are paying for past wars, because every time we have a war, we have people that come back injured and wounded. I don't have to tell you, and we take care of them. We should take care of them for the rest of their lives, but it is costly to do so. That's a cost of war also. So all the rest of the federal government's priorities, whether it's housing, health, education, transportation, unemployment, labor, food and agriculture, and science, are squeezed into the remaining 38%. And then this is one of the nuclear weapon submarines that we build with that military budget. It costs $4 billion to build one of these things. I'm not completely up to date on my research. I think we have 12 of these babies, of which 8 patrol the ocean at any one time. Any one of these weapons, any one of these submarines contains enough nuclear weapons to destroy all the cities of any continent. So they have 24 missiles on each submarine, and each of them has multiple independently targetable nuclear warheads, each of which can attack a city and destroy everything within that city. So that's what we buy with our taxpayers' money. But we're building more of these things, right? So we have 12. We use 8 at a time. The rest are under repair at any one time, but we're building more. Why? Why are we doing this? I'll leave you with that question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cole. Wouldn't it be far more satisfying for us to be looking at pictures of schoolhouses and classrooms and playgrounds representing those billions of dollars that are spent on that particular weapon of war? So thank you for that. So this evening, we have 4 extraordinary panelists, as I have said. What I'm going to do is to introduce each one of them to you. They will then, I'll go back round. They'll be then given 8 minutes to make their presentation. I'll introduce you in a little bit about what your presentation will focus on. At the 7-minute mark, I'll let you know that you have a minute remaining. And then following your presentation, the audience will have 4 minutes to put questions to the panelists, to each panelist. So we will do that. Jonathan is shaking his head, so there's something. No. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that. Okay, so Max Page, if he will wave, is the president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, which represents a union of 117,000 members, including public school and college educators. Prior to that, he was professor of architecture at UMass Amherst with a focus on urban history and president of the UMass faculty unit. Thank you very much, Max, for joining us this evening. I know how busy your schedule is, so it's wonderful to have you here. Next is Kathy Greeley. Kathy was an old pal of mine in the Jobs with Peace campaign. So Kathy, it's very nice to see you. She is a longtime public school teacher and reading and writing specialist, and a leader of community advocates for replacing the MCAS tests with authentic assessment, an ongoing conversation. Kathy is the author of Why Fly That Way, Linking Academic and Community Achievement. Her latest book, Testing Education, A Teacher's Memoir, will be out in April of 2024, published by UMass Press. Our next panelist is Edith Bazile. Have I pronounced that your last name correctly? Great. Edith is there. She is the executive director of Black Advocates for Excellence Education. She has long experience in the Boston Public Schools, including senior program director for professional development for special education and related services, and program director for secondary English language arts. She has also served as adjunct faculty in UMass Boston Graduate School of Education. Edith currently serves as president of the Black Educators Alliance of Massachusetts, BEAM as it is known, and on the board of Citizens for Public Schools. Welcome, Edith. And finally, Andrew King. Where are you, Andrew? Ah, there you are, Andrew. Andrew is a research fellow at Boston University, studying the school-to-prison pipeline that affects disadvantaged students. He worked for many years for the New York City Council on Youth and Public School Policy and holds a PhD from UMass Boston, analyzing the New York City Community Schools program. Andrew serves on the board of Citizens for Public Schools and is a candidate for election to the Cambridge School Committee. Good luck on that for you, Andrew. So let us start with Max Page. Max will focus his remarks, although not exclusively, on MTA priorities for Massachusetts educators, students, and families.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. It's really great to be here with so many great activists. I am zooming in from the Andover Auditorium, Andover Public School Auditorium, because I was here for sort of being a silent representative in their bargaining. So I really would like to just say a couple words, and then I'll quickly lay out the priorities that me and my Vice President, Deb McCarthy, and our board of directors has set for the MTA for this year. And just as a reminder, as Carol was saying, we are the largest union in New England of 117,000 members in 400 different locals, most of the public schools and in college faculty and staff in the state. I put in quotes and notes I was thinking about, we're a social justice union, but in some ways I think that's redundant. A union fights for fair pay and good working conditions and on behalf of the people they serve. Unions are and should be democratic institutions that fight on behalf of all working people inside workplaces like our schools and colleges, but also in our communities. And the MTA really, over the past years has really been on that journey. We say that we care, if we care about our students as we do, we have to then care about the wages their parents earn, the paid leave they should have as a right, the housing security they deserve, the transportation systems to get them to work, the healthcare they need, and also a climate resilient world all of us must have. So that's our work inside our schools and colleges and outside for our families. And as I really love that opening about this, putting money where our minds are. And just as a reminder, yes, we have to change the federal budget, but if we look at our own state, if per capita, if Massachusetts were a country, we would be the 4th wealthiest country on the planet. So we have more than enough money in the state for the needs of our students and educators and really all working people. And some of the things that we've been working on with many of you on the screen, it's really been very gratifying over the past number of years. We put a stop to the expansion of charter schools back in 2016. We won paid family medical leave for every worker except municipal workers, I will say, but everyone else has access to paid family medical leave. The $11 minimum wage, and now the $15 minimum wage, and now we're working on $20 minimum wage. In 2019, winning the Student Opportunity Act, a very, very progressive reinvestment in public education to the communities that have been most deprived of funds. And then, of course, many of you are involved in the Fair Share Amendment this past year, where we asked the very wealthiest, not just the 1%, the half of 1%, the top half of 1%, to pay a little bit more in order to have the schools and colleges and also transportation systems that we all need. And later on, perhaps we can talk about where that money is going. It's starting to flow into our communities and to our citizens. So that's really been a lot of the really wonderful work that I've been pleased to be a part of. Let me just quickly name the priorities for this year. And as I said, these are, the beauty, what I love about the union work is that it is a democratic space, one of the largest institutions that are democratically run. And so me and my vice president develop priorities, but they have to be, wrestled with by our elected board. And so this is where we have landed for this year. The most important, which is probably going to be there every year, is building stronger locals. And that's the educator locals all across the Commonwealth. That's why I'm here in Andover, to support them as they fight for a fair contract. The involvement of our members in advocating for their schools and also their working conditions is always a baseline for a union like ours. The second is, as many of you have been involved with, and obviously Kathy will speak about this, she's been a champion for this issue for many, many years, which is ending the high stakes testing regime. And we're doing that through a ballot initiative effort to eliminate the graduation requirement of the MCAS, but we're also working with a coalition on what's called the Thrive Act, which would also get rid of a failed policy of receivership, state takeover of schools and whole districts. So there's been a disaster. The third part, obviously very close to my heart, coming from UMass, is winning high quality, debt-free public higher education. Really investing in the quality of our institutions and guaranteeing that working people could go to public college or university and graduate debt-free. This is not some visionary socialist fantasy. It is really how our state public colleges and universities worked for many years. It was possible to go to UMass Amherst, the most expensive public university, and graduate debt-free by working 10 hours a week minimum wage job all the way through the 1980s. So we're trying to reclaim the access to public higher ed, and this is absolutely an economic and racial justice issue. The fourth is We won the Fair Share Amendment, which was a generational victory. It took 107 years to make our tax system more progressive, but we're going to have to make sure that working people and communities win a fair share of that fair share. That's going to be an ongoing battle. That's the fourth priority that we have. The fifth is lifting up the lowest paid and least well treated workers in our schools, which are our education support professionals. Often it's the paraprofessionals or the custodians or the secretaries or the cafeteria workers. And we have been making a consistent effort, and that's what's going on right here in Andover, is demanding living wages. Any adult who works in a public school, a full-time job, deserves to make a living wage. I don't think that we should have an argument with that from anywhere, especially in very wealthy communities like Andover. So the ESP Bill of Rights and call for living wages for our education support professionals is that fifth goal. And we've just two more. One is a very big goal that we have, which is to begin to really introduce the idea and enact community schools. These are the ideas that the school is a community hub they're trusted places, but make them available for parents for learning in night classes, make schools the access point for social services, even health services. It's really seeing community schools as really almost 24-hour institutions. California has hundreds of these. We have a few in Boston, but we really want to deepen this idea in Massachusetts, have this take hold. Final point, which is a very large and important one to our members. Every meeting I go to, it's brought up. The last point is the seventh is we really need to have a local and statewide effort to address student mental health and behavior issues. Our kids are not well, and this began long before the pandemic. The pandemic certainly exacerbated things, but the mental health of young people and then how they play that out in behavioral issues in our schools has been growing for really 10, 15 years. And it's just something that we all have to confront. And it's a multifaceted issue, but our members are now getting organized, and we are really trying to push for all the supports that our young people need to be healthy, not only in school, but throughout their lives. And it's a critical moment for them to get the supports they need. So those are the 7 big priorities for the Mass Teachers Association. I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Oh, thank you very much, Mac. Right under the 8 minutes. Excellent. So we are going to take 4 minutes for questions from participants, and there is a hand from Jeffrey.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Indeed.
Believe it or not, but I was actually almost as you can see in the chat box, I was almost a victim of the school to prison pipeline system. Due to the fact that because I have high functioning autism, do you want to hear the story what happened, or do you want me to share with you another time?
I think probably share another time. I know that Carol said there's only a couple of minutes for each panelist. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Okay. So I was backed into a corner, and I just wanted revenge on some people back then. I didn't know what to do. I was only able to avoid this because I spoke up the plan out of fear of doing it. I just didn't want to do this. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
I'm sorry. So Max, do you think you could share your contact if you want to learn more about this?
Sure, let's do that. Let's send your information, but I'm glad to do that. I know we've got a couple more questions in the queue.
Put it in the chat, Jeff, and Max will pick it up. Let me see.
Both my email and cell.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
All right,
Jeff.
thank you.
Thank you. Mark?
Yes, Max, thanks not just for your remarks, but for all the work you and the MTA do in Massachusetts. I'm actually out in California, but I'm interested in the other part of today's webinar, the not bombs part, if you will. And do you, or maybe others, know to what extent the tax revenue in Massachusetts depend on defense-related industries, and how many of the families in various communities are working in those industries. Because that obviously has implications for the extent to which people are willing to support peace.
Yes, no, I think, Mark, that's a very good question. Obviously, some of the big industries that have made Massachusetts so wealthy are connected to the defense industry. I mean, obviously, Raytheon is a big company, and I think it's fine that we lost Smith & Wesson as a gun manufacturer, although that was a lot of jobs. But so you're right, that's a real conundrum. I don't have off the top of my head how much money and jobs there are in that industry, but I suspect it is a fair amount. It's a conundrum for those who want to convert from bombs to books.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Mark. A point for consideration, yes. Marilyn? Marilyn, are you there?
Yes, this took a while to,
Hi, Marilyn.
hi. A couple of things, just a quick comment. Another big arms manufacturer that now has offices in Central Square, Cambridge, is Elbit, Israel's largest arms manufacturer. And there's a campaign, if you're interested, contact me to get Elbit away. But the question, Max, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned debt-free college. Why not cost-free? When I went to Brooklyn College, it was free. And we didn't get, but I would also argue, for stipends so students don't have to work. Maybe they can work in the summer or something, that we should pay them. And don't we want educated people, right?
No, I love that, Marilyn. And good to see you. It's interesting. There's I forget the name of the French folk singer. Someone gave me this wonderful quote, and it says, in some countries, they pay students to go to college and they thank them for it. So absolutely, like when students get to go to college, they of course advance themselves. So they pursue a lifelong learning and a career. They help all of us. It is such a benefit for the economy. Yes, that's important, but also for our whole civic and cultural life. And it is important what you just raised. The notion of debt-free actually goes beyond what the traditional movement has been, which is to eliminate tuition and fees, which of course is wonderful. But what we say is, let's look at the full cost of attendance, because tuition and fees is only a small portion, like 15 or 20% of the true cost of attendance. And the reason that so many working class kids and working class kids of color don't go to college or don't get through is because I frankly think we lure them in and say we have these free programs, but they really are last dollar, which means after all your different Pell Grants and other things, the state will make up a little bit extra to cover your tuition and fees. But what about room and board and transportation or childcare? So the goal of the Cherish Act, I should lift that up, the Cherish Act.
We have just a few seconds.
Okay. The goal of that act is actually to guarantee a kid, a young age, and their families, they can go to public college or university and graduate debt-free, including those full costs. So we could talk more about that. Thanks.
Yeah, and we may have an opportunity to pursue that at the end. So thank you very much. Thank you, Marilyn, as well. Our next panelist is Kathy Greeley. As I said earlier, Kathy is a former Cambridge teacher and literacy coach. And her focus is going to be on more teaching, less testing, eliminating the MCAS tests as a graduation requirement. Welcome, Kathy. It's nice to see you.
Thank you, Carol. It's great to see you. I'm really honored to be here with all these amazing people and looking at the participants on this webinar. I don't think I need to explain the MCAS too much, but I think I'll just give a little quick background and then say a few more things about it, and then maybe open it up to questions. So if you don't know, MCAS stands for Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System. It was part of the 1993 Reform Act. I think it's important to say that it is not a comprehensive assessment system. And my view is we should call it the MNAS, the Massachusetts Not Comprehensive Assessment System. Initially, when we first gave the MCAS back in 1998, it was only given to 4th, 8th, and 10th graders. It took us weeks to give this test. It was unbelievable. Just subjecting these, fourth graders are 10 years old, eighth graders are 12 or 13, seeing them go day after day after day. And then in 2002, with the passage of No Child Left Behind, we started testing kids in third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and 10th grade in order with these massive amounts of tests. And in 2003, the MCAS became a requirement to pass all sections of the MCAS in order to get your high school diploma. I just want to point out that there was huge opposition to this from the very, very beginning, 25 and more years ago. Parent groups across the state, the union, both teachers unions, the MTA and the MFT, people were very concerned about what this test, this not assessment system, but a high stakes test was going to do to education. I think people were very upset that the idea that you would deny a student a high school diploma based on this one high stakes test was extremely unfair and would have seriously negative consequences, which we know it has. There have been thousands and thousands of students who have not received a high school diploma, which goes on to prevent them from being able to do other things. For example, you can't, I'm talking to peace advocates, but you can't join the military if you have not received a high school diploma. And for many working class kids, and that was the way to get to college, we have seen the rate of incarceration go up, which a Massachusetts judge attributed to. He said, I see more and more young people in front of me in my courtroom who have not passed the MCAS and they had nowhere else to go except into the street. So that the fears around that have definitely been unfortunately very legitimate. There were also concerns about the developmental appropriateness of this kind of test. I've watched third graders sit for hours. I've watched them work all day long on this test. Like, I'm talking about 6 hours of school. And that's just for one day. And there are multiple days of this test. And I think that is cruel and unusual punishment for children. And we wonder why some of our children are having mental health problems. And I do not attribute that all to what our schools have become because of the MCAS, but I seriously think the MCAS and the pressures it has put on our school population have definitely created an environment where children are in rebellion, is what I would say, because they're not being, what their needs are not being able to be addressed in school. There were big concerns about people teaching to the test. There were big concerns about narrowing the curriculum, that we'd only be teaching literacy and math, which has been in fact true, especially in urban school systems. But I think one of the issues I really wanted to raise up was the racist nature of MCAS. And when we really look at the history of standardized testing, we go back to 100 and more years to issues around eugenicists who have wanted to use standardized testing initially to decide who should be cannon fodder in the First World War and who would be officers. And those tests were shown to be incredibly racist and classist in terms of their nature. And I just have to say that they have not changed. They continue. The biggest thing that the MCAS shows us is students' zip code, where they grew up, where they're growing up, and their parents' education level. And I think that's a huge problem if we're really trying to meet to prepare all of our children to be strong citizens and part of the 21st century, this test is not helping us get there. I wanted to just say that all of the concerns that people had in the very beginning of the testing back in the 1998, 99, 2000, I think we have seen these concerns be beyond our wildest nightmares of, and I'll just give you an example that in Cambridge, which I've always considered a very progressive, very open, creative, not into standardizing everything. But in Cambridge, back in the early 2000s, as the MCAS became more and more of a pressure, our superintendent introduced tests to prepare for the tests. So we started having 4 more tests during the
1
year.
minute, Kathy.
Okay, to get ready for the big test at the end of the year. And then I will just say that there are so many ways that this has changed our schools. And I use the example of boiling frogs, that if you wanted to boil a frog, you wouldn't put them in a pot of boiling water because they jump out. You put it in lukewarm water and you gradually turn up the heat. And that's what the MCAS has been doing in our schools for the last 25 years. And it has brought our schools to a boiling point. I think my reason for fighting around this for the decades that I've been doing it is because I believe in public education. I think the MCAS is an attack on public education, and we have to rally to defend one of our most precious institutions in our democracy.
Thank you very much for that, Kathy. And I have shared that sentiment since 1993 and continue to do so. So we appreciate your continuing to fight that battle. So it is 4 minutes for questions for Kathy. If you have a question, raise your hand. Someone did put a question in the chat. To what extent privatization of education affected the policy of standardized testing? So to what extent has the privatization of education affected the policy of standardized testing?
Well, I could just speak a little bit to that connection, because I think it's a really great question, because I think that the MCAS has been used as kind of a spearhead or the metric to give the impression that our schools are failing. And so when people start losing faith, and I think that narrative is false. And if we look at it more carefully, you would see that that's a false narrative. But as that narrative has gotten more and more strength, people begin to say, maybe we need to do something else. And I think that's opened the door to charter schools and to vouchers. And I think that the impetus for those, I wouldn't call them, I guess they're a kind of reform, but they're a very undermining kind of movement, has been, I think there are people who have really understood that there's a lot of money to be made in public education, and that their interest in privatizing schools to make more money has been connected to the MCAS, creating this idea that our schools are failing when they're not. Some are not. Most are not. I don't know if I answered the question.
Jeffrey, do you have a question, or did you forget to take your hand signal down?
At first, I thought I forgot to. At first, I forgot to, but now I do have a question. So how does MCAS actually affect people with high fun who are born mentally disabled? Does it affect them negatively or the opposite? Please, and tell me, please, because I too have a mental disability.
So I will just share one very brief story where I was in charge of administering the MCAS when I was working in a school in Boston for a couple of years. And we had a student who was in the hospital on a suicide watch. And the Department of Education was calling me to make sure that she took the MCAS. And I'm like, this child is fighting for her life. And they're like, yeah, but she has to take the test. And if you don't take the test, you get a 0, and the 0 gets averaged into your school's score. So 0 being averaged into other scores is bad. If you don't take the test, or if you fail the test, Jeffrey, when you're in high school, you cannot graduate. You cannot get a high school diploma. And that is a serious problem for young people today.
Yeah,
Thank
I was lucky to graduate, but I bet that many others that are not so lucky. I actually feel for them.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey, for that. There's a question in the chat, and then we'll go on to the next panelist. Could you give an example or story about how MCAS has damaged project-based learning?
Oh yeah, that's very easy. So in my school, when I taught 7th and 8th grade middle school humanities, and we did a lot of things in my school. We had a program where kids went out and worked in the community for a week. We called it City Sites. My class would write a play every year and put on the play. The math class used to do a bridge building project every year. I've seen all of those programs, all of those project-based kind of learning experiences disappear. They don't do them anymore because there's so much pressure on following a specific curriculum in a certain way so that our every school reaches the test scores that the district is looking for. So it's had a serious impact on how the kind of learning that we used to be able to do. And when I would talk with younger teachers about, we used to do this and we used to do this in my class, and the teachers just would be like, wow, I wish we could do that, but we don't have time because we have to prepare. We have to be focused on the test. So
Thank you, Kathy, very much. You should do a series of podcasts about MCAS. Yeah. Thank you. So our next panelist is Edith Basil. She is a Black advocate for educational excellence. I think we said you were the president of Black Advocates for Educational Excellence, nonetheless affiliated with. And your focus will be the continuing struggle for equal access to quality public education.
Thank you so much, Carol. And I'm really happy to be here. And those of you who know me know that I always start with history. So let's get to it. I want to start with a quote in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, quote, "We've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to cash a check. I am a descendant of African people who were kidnapped, enslaved in perpetuity, robbed of language, culture, country of origin, and humanity, all while enduring centuries of forced labor to build the economic foundation of this country. Despite the brutality, enslaved Africans discovered and contributed life-saving inventions and invaluable contributions that we all enjoy today. Yet there has been no national acknowledgement, healing, or reparations. Black literacy was a threat to the slave trade. Still, Black people risked their lives to learn to read, and they rebelled. Take Nat Turner, a religious preacher who taught himself to read the Bible, become a crusader against the evils of slavery in his 20s, and led the infamous Nat Turner Rebellion. Slave states passed laws forbidding Black people to read or write. Reading while Black was a crime, punishable by severe beatings, amputation of toes, fingers, and even death. You all heard of Harriet Tubman, but you may not know Harriet Jacobs, born in 1813, who wrote the most prolific self-narrative entitled Incident of the Life of a Slave Girl. When public education was founded in Boston, Black people were still enslaved for another approximately 150 years. That did not stop the pursuit of literacy. In 1798, Black parents organized and founded the African School to teach literacy Black students, but still continued to struggle for public funding for centuries. Then came desegregation, which forced Black students into schools all over the country, but our Black schools were closed and we lost our Black literacy warriors and went into these desegregated schools who refused to hire Black educators. Black literacy gaps widened. Desegregation exploded Boston's anti-Blackness. Desegregation was not about integration. It was about equitable educational funding for Black students. I attended segregated schools and was told I was not smart enough to get into college. After graduation, I had to fight on my own at 17 years old to get into college. I worked full-time 9 to 5 and paid for remedial courses, which I went to from 6 to 8 p.m. because at 17 years old, I knew I had to go to college because I had to have a life. When I returned to my school district as a teacher, when my teachers told me I could not become a teacher, it was like returning to the scene of a crime. But I was determined to be the educator that I did not have. Very little changed. Schools where segregated Black students were pushed through without preparing them for college. Then in 1993, you all know what happened. Ed reform came about and I was thrilled. I thought finally there would be accountability to educate Black students. This district failed to teach. I was inspired by the buzzwords like college readiness, standards-based education, and promises to close racial gaps. But then I realized the problem. You see, when I went to school, I received a diploma, even though I was not prepared for college. MCAS required students like me to master curriculum that they would never taught. This was not a move towards racial equity. It was weaponization of a standardized assessment that created further barriers to Black students. If I was required to take the MCAS, I would have been denied a diploma, and all of my aspirations to become an educator and all of the work that I've done over my 32-year career would have been for naught. This is what makes MCAS a system of punishment. But I argue MCAS is not the problem. MCAS is like an X-ray. It doesn't create gaps, it exposes them and the pain that comes with it for children who have not been prepared. The hard truth is, students should not be blamed for the failures of schools. And schools have remained calcified in the deficit mindset. And we have to fully tackle, the schools have not fully tackled the racism of low and no expectation that inflicts wounds on Black students. This has made the use of the MCAS as a graduation requirement akin to bleeding of a wound, but it is not the wound itself. Bleeding occurs from an untreated, unhealed deep wound. If you don't treat the deep wound, the bleeding may eventually stop, but the individual ends up scarred for life. My point is, it is not enough to stop the bleeding. Schools must end wounding students. A recent Yale study concluded students who are not provided high quality literacy instruction suffer physical and mental health issues throughout their lifespan. Educational wounds include school hardening, over surveillance of Black students, harsh disciplinary practices, overrepresentation of Black students in segregated special education programming. These lead to the cradle to prison pipeline, inequitable funding, disproportionate school closing and merges. School districts must address the persistent gaps in literacy rates that leave the majority of Black students behind. These assaults send Black parents scrambling for alternatives to public education at the highest rates. Education reform did not dismantle systems of white privilege. It reified the perpetration of systemic inequities. Johns Hopkins research affirms that Black educators are impactful in closing gaps, but districts fail to hire and retain Black teachers. Schools cannot decolonize the curriculum, create more fair and equitable assessment systems, aspirational cultures of learning without Black educators. Schools cannot teach Black history, not like it's an exception, but as foundational to American history without Black teachers. Policymakers cannot reform teacher prep programs, pipeline programs, educator licensure, professional learning, and equitable funding formulas without centering Black scholars. James Baldwin stated, if one really wishes to know how justice
Edith.
in a country, one does not question the protected members. One goes to the unprotected, those precisely who need the law's protections most. MCAS must not be weaponized against students who suffer from a lack of racial equities in schools, but our outrage meter must call for an end of all racial injustice in schools. All weapons of educational injustice must be disarmed, and schools must be held accountable for educating Black students who have historically been denied educational opportunities. This cannot be accomplished without core grade level standards and regularly measuring how students are meeting curriculum standards. Progress must be measured and monitored through a system of external school accountability, because schools have not proven that they can educate Black students who have been denied educational equity and racial justice since chattel slavery. In closing, I leave you with the words of Ijoma Alu, quote, systemic racism is a machine that runs whether we pull the lever or not, and by letting it just be, we are responsible for what it produces. We have to actually dismantle the machine if we want to make change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that passionate presentation, much appreciated and well placed. So 4 minutes for questions for Edith. And if you have a question, please use your hand raising function. Anyone? So let's see if there's a question in the chat. Oops, Moji. Question?
Hi, this is Moji. I just sent a link. Thank you, Sister Edith, for the using of the term decolonization. And, I sent a link to what I'm doing regarding that. I had one course that I taught at a so-called University of Phoenix, aka Apollo Incorporated. And I will never go anywhere near a for-profit educational, so-called educational institution. And it is important that we understand that the process that was very purposefully, the policy, the mega policy, the meta policy of undermining public transportation in order to get people addicted to private cars, and undermining, thriving cities in order to, for privatization to the suburbs is being repeated in the process of privatizing education and healthcare in order so that these huge corporations make money. And thank you for what you're doing, all of you. And it's a very important struggle so that this country can one day become civilized.
Thank you. Thank you, Moji.
Thank you.
I think in response to that, I would just say that I would, unlike the last speaker, say that public schools have failed Black students, and Black parents leave public schools at the highest rate to seek alternatives. And so there is a question of commitment to educate Black students in public education, because it just has not happened. And when you talk about progress, I have not seen that. Generation after generation, we still have the same issue of these wide gaps. And that is what, and it's not for lack of funds. It is problematic because we know that the schools in the Black communities are impacted by a less emphasis on high quality instruction. And that is a problem of public education. And we have to sit with that, and we have to own that, and not blame external forces on that. And we have to look at the data and sit with that data, because it is, if educators continue to pat themselves on the back and not pay attention to data, we are going to stay in the same place where public education and public schools have failed Black students.
Thank
So I
you.
would say that to that.
Our next questioner, Roxy.
Thank you. Edith, thank you for your presentation. But a question I have is, and I actually am an MTA member. I work in higher ed, and I see the ramifications of individuals that have a high school diploma and just aren't prepared. And I wonder, because it's one of those difficult challenges in the sense of course, I want children to be able to get high school diplomas and have career paths and things, but I want them to be prepared. Just like if a university gives you their college degree, whether there's a proficiency exam or something you have to take to get it, I think high schools need to have something also, because the previous history of graduating individuals that can't read and write and just throwing them out into the world with a high school diploma that basically does them no good when they arrive at places and can't read and write isn't the solution either. Like, just because I remember the experience of people and teachers telling me, my children, oh, don't worry. And then I get the MCAS, and I'm like, oh, not meeting standards. No, I am worried. What is the standards they're not meeting? What's going on? So I would ask my question to you. I share all that. And then my question to you is, what would you say then is the way that, whether it's the MCAS or whatever brand or item, because something has to be there to show what if a child or someone has learned information, how would you say a test or some metric system could be utilized so it shows the disparities sometimes where it's particular populations that aren't being taught information, or some districts are getting taught in certain ways that others aren't and having better outcomes? What would be one thing that you think could be utilized, or the MCAS could be used in a way that could really benefit children?
Well, I think schools.
Answer your question very briefly. We have
Okay, I
very
think
short
schools.
time and one more panel.
Schools are the only system that penalize the students for not meeting standards. You know, just like that X-ray analogy, you wouldn't say to a patient who has an X-ray where they have a fracture, well, why did you allow that fracture to happen? Schools have the responsibility and the accountability to address the gaps. And I think that MCAS is a target that should not be placed on the backs of students. It should reflect what schools failed to do. And that's where I believe that the accountability measure is misfired, that there has to be district accountability for educating Black students, and Black students should not suffer because they have not been taught. We have an old saying, if it wasn't caught, it wasn't taught. I was not taught in high school. I was pushed through the system without having an equivalent high quality educational experience that my white counterparts had. And that's why I was penalized, not because I didn't have to take the MCAS. I was penalized because I was not college ready. So I had to spend another year to take remedial courses. And how many students will do that because the schools failed them? Not because I didn't have the ability. It was because I was Black and female, and I was invisible in the system that did not pay attention to the gifts and talents that Black students had. My gifts and talents were not cultivated in the system. We still have that problem when it comes to Black students in public education.
Thank you very much, Edith. So I hope we hold on to our audience. We have one more panelist and one more quick question. So we've got, are you saying never mind, no question?
I'll pass just so we get to the next panelist.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, Edith, and the questioners as well. Things don't get going until they get near the end of time, and then we think of the kinds of things that need to be said. And our last panelist, Andrew King, is a member of the Board of Citizens for Public Schools and candidate for Cambridge School Committee. And he's going to focus his conversation around right-wing efforts to suppress truthful curriculum across the nation. Andrew.
Thanks so much, Carol. Thanks, everyone. It's great to be in a room here with the peace movement, the anti-war movement, and the education justice movement. It's so crucial. I'm going to talk about a crucial issue. I was asked to speak about the national political climate and attacks on public education. I'm by no means an expert on this issue, but have followed it. So let's remember, in the wake of the George Floyd murder at the hands of Minneapolis police in 2020, this rocked the nation. Over 2,000 protests exploded across all 50 states. Trump responds with law and order rhetoric, the same rhetoric of Nixon, Reagan, Clinton. Police respond like they did in Ferguson with tanks and military-style crackdowns. Donald Trump activated the National Guard in 21 states. Folks say the George Floyd uprising sparked a new racial awakening. There was a vast proliferation of racial justice and Black Lives Matter activism, a mainstreaming of anti-racism, if you will. And one of the most important battlegrounds where this took shape was in our public schools. We saw in the rise of a police-free schools movement, which emerged to amplify the call to abolish the school to prison pipeline and police in our schools, who, in the 1970s, there were 100 cops in all U.S. schools. By 2003, there were about 15,000 full-time armed police officers in our schools. And thousands of teachers during this time were attending teach-ins and webinars and increasing social justice teaching and trying to infuse more racial justice in their curricula. This clearly scared the ruling class and the right-wing neo-fascist and neo-Confederate politicians in many states. And we witnessed the latest wave of the white backlash, the greatest essay on which was written by Martin Luther King Jr. in 1967, titled Racism and the White Backlash. And this is just the latest iteration of an ongoing counter-revolution that's reared its ugly head over the last 2 centuries against every attempt by African Americans or women or workers to expand the American democratic project. So as of this past April, these right-wing legislators in over 180 local, state, and federal government agencies have proposed over 557 anti-critical race theory bills, resolutions, and other measures, which have been adopted in 28 states to limit and criminalize what gets taught, discussed, or read in our nation's public schools. The boogeyman chosen by these various architects of the conservative movement is called critical race theory. Of course, as Edith just so eloquently laid out, most schools aren't actually teaching critical race theory or radical Black liberation traditions. But this, and critical race theory just states it's a legal framework that became popular in the 80s, states that U.S. social institutions are still laced with racism, which is embedded in their laws and their regulations and so on. But critical race theory became a catch-all, a Trojan horse for the right wing, for the entrenched white nationalist minority to suppress teaching of how race, systemic racism, sexism, or any form of oppression shapes our society and institutions today. It means a ban on teaching the idea that social problems are created by racist or patriarchal societal structures and systems, right? So what is a teacher to do if a child wants to know why a Black person is 5 times more likely to get killed by police, or why people of color are 3 times more likely to die of COVID, and so on and so forth? You cannot be neutral on a moving train, as Howard Zinn said, and that is exactly what the right wing wants. Trump was saying that public schools are indoctrinating our children with hateful lies, anti-patriotic, teaching white kids to hate themselves, and that we should outlaw any materials that would cause some kids to feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any psychological distress on account of their race or sex. This, of course, was not a grassroots movement among the white, poor, working class. It was carefully orchestrated and led by conservative activist Christopher Rufo, who honed in on CRT as what he called the perfect villain, a term that connotes hostile, academic, race-obsessed, divisive, elitist, anti-American views, and said, we will turn it toxic and place all the various cultural insanities under that brand category. So this is a part of the pattern of Trump and the white nationalist movement, this entrenched elite minority in power, exploiting white working class outrage, stoking the fires of white identity, and fueling the culture wars. Mind you, the undermining of public education is also going to hurt all kids who attend public schools, including poor and working class whites. So this is how elites, Republican elites, have always fueled up white backlash politics. So we talk about hundreds of CRT laws, and these have had real tangible consequences on the ground, with dozens of teachers actually losing their jobs. Teachers are threatened with losing their teaching licenses. In the case of a place like Arizona, you're threatened with being fined $5,000 if you teach one of these concepts. It's particularly ironic and pernicious that these people making laws outlawing critical race theory just confirms the point that racism is indeed embedded in the law, right? These are the type of racist structures that CRT is seeking to explain. And also just the fact that, again, this entrenched white minority has been using our political institutions like the Electoral College and the filibuster in the Senate, all institutions which since the founding were concessions to white supremacy, right? Going back to the 3/5 compromise, to disproportionately advantage a white rural minority within our elite democracy. And so they don't want children learning the truth about this history. And it's also, this is the exact political climate, this guise of neutrality, of a colorblind account of US history and current affairs that set the stage for the dismantling of affirmative action in a recent Supreme Court case. And it's also ironic that, they want to blame free history that places no blame on societal structures or white America, yet these same corporate elites have been blaming the public schools over the last 30 years in a war on public education for every societal problem. They've been blaming public school teachers.
You have 1 minute, Andrew.
Public schools. As you all know, another component of this backlash has been AstroTurf right-wing groups like Moms for Liberty taking over school boards. They've ran over 500 school board candidates, right-wing candidates, and gotten half of those elected. And of course, this has just been the CRT has just been the gateway for broader attacks on LGBTQ students and trans rights, and so on and so forth. And I didn't even get a chance to talk about the book ban. There was 1,600 books banned from school libraries last year alone in over 138 school districts. So you're seeing an authoritarian crackdown on teaching the truth across the country.
Thank you so much, Andrew. There's such a lot to consider and to discuss as we go on. So we'll do 4 minutes for questions, and Mike has his hand raised.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that excellent presentation on the right-wing attacks. The problem that I have, and you're not the only one who's speaking about right-wing attacks, the problem that I have with it is that we forget what happened before these right-wing attacks, which is we had the neoliberal attacks on public education. MCAS happened in Massachusetts. The Democratic Party runs Massachusetts. Even I don't care if there's a governor who's Republican, whatever. I'm a retired history teacher. My principal came in one day, part of my class, teaching Mother Jones. The next day, Eugene Debs. The next day was what is socialism? And I had a note in my mailbox, see me as soon as possible. And he told me socialism wasn't even on the standards. I had 3 awful years with that principal of bad evaluations, and thank God I had a union. It's like one of the things that's wrong with MCAS is, as a history teacher, is I had to teach to the standards. I had to teach the information here. So it's like the problem that I have in terms of focus on the right-wing attack is this amnesia that we have in terms of the past. So I wish people like you who have an excellent analysis on the right-wing attack would also say, hey, you know, what happened beforehand wasn't any good either.
Right. It's in my talking point, Mike, so I just didn't get to it, but you're 100% correct. There's been a 30-year bipartisan war of corporate elites in both parties on public education.
Right.
And I would argue that weakening by the corporate Democrats has probably made our schools more vulnerable to the ideologies being pushed by the extreme right. You know, the logic of school choice, right, and the charter school movement and attempts to privatize, and so right with the right wing, that's their long-term goal, is to dismantle public education along with Democrat elites, right? But then also they're driving the social issues and the cultural war also to consolidate political power. And they're also right, and they're doing it to drive parents away from the public school system, just like they did in the 50s and 60s. They, you know, it's a mass exodus, mass resistance of white parents. I didn't talk about that either, using the guise of parental rights. This is very key here. That they'd rather than attend desegregated schools, they'd rather collapse the whole system and remove their kids from the public sphere.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mike. Jeff, quick question. Jeffrey? Okay.
I'm here, sorry.
You
Sorry.
have a question
Anyway,
for Andrew?
now don't get me wrong, I'm for the book ban, but there are some books that I believe that should be banned, like the Mein Kampf, the Turner Diaries, those kind of books that can actually turn people into far right extremists or terrorists, if you know what I mean. Those kind of books should be banned.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
a great point. Yeah. Robin Kelly, one of the authors who's been banned, along with, of course, Angela Davis and Bell Hooks and Maya Angelou and so many others, said it's so ironic that they talk about banning these hateful books on the left, but then, as you said, real hateful books on the right are not targeted by any of these politicians.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you all very much. You've hung in there past our promised 8 o'clock hour, and I'm going to turn to Jonathan to wrap up the panel. Thank you. Got your microphone on? Say something, Jonathan.
All right. Can you hear me?
There you are.
Okay. Anyway, thanks everybody. Great talks. Thanks to the audience hanging in here. I just want to say last week, Jamal Bauman, the congressman from New York, who's a longtime teacher in the Bronx, announced a national campaign, more teaching, less testing. He's filed a bill in the U.S. Congress. He's looking for national support. And I think one of the things we're going to try to do is, we in Mass Peace Action, we have contacts around the country, and so does our revolution, so does Poor People's Campaign. And we're going to try to support Congressman Bowman, who asked for support in opposing these kind of backward positions in the Congress. At any rate, thank you so much. And we'll put you on a mailing list and keep you posted on further events. And that will involve inviting you to a meeting about developing our campaign. So good night.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you to our panelists. Good job.
Right.